correct pronunciation is Plepyte, and she is joining me here as we have had on the balcony, as you all know, on this stage, ambassadors to and from the United States from a number of countries, including Russia, with Mike McFall on the radio, on the TV pod, Bulgaria, Moldova, EU ambassadors, officials from the Ukraine, generals in the war like General Wesley Clark, obviously because a major focus has been the war in the Ukraine. So I'm particularly delighted to welcome our first ambassador from the Baltic countries, and I'm not surprised to learn that they coordinate their activities in this city on the Hill and in the White House. With the news of last night, I suppose an obvious question is, Mrs. Ambassador, let me give you something simple, and that is Henry Kissinger died yesterday. If you could have asked Henry Kissinger any question in his fertile mind right to the end, what would that have been?
Good question. I think he answered my question some months ago, in April, if I'm not mistaken, as well, when he wrote an article about Ukrainians' path to NATO and what we can do for Ukraine this time. Because having been in U.S. politics and diplomacy for so many decades, and he died 100 years, so he was almost 80 years or something like that already here involved or something like that. So his voice, his words were very significant.
And what did he say in respect to
Ukraine? Because I think all now one of the main attention or something is to Ukraine was happening, that to prevent future wars or to, I'm not know exactly the quotation but that the Ukrainians' future is NATO, and that's one of the needs or something like that. So but Kissinger was a figure, I think, for many diplomats or something like that.
In looking at the media this morning, and I'm sure everybody read and followed what the press was saying today, one can say that it's a tribute. Last night there was a minute of silence, but this morning there was a sort of long-armed assessment of his contribution to international affairs. How do you think, Mrs. Ambassador, the legacy what would the legacy show? Would it go down that the world was better off with Henry Kissinger playing such a key role or not?
I don't have a crystal ball or something to see how the future would treat him or something, but I know how many diplomats, politicians were quoting Kissinger or his famous diplomacy book. I think it's in everyone's libraries, especially young diplomats as well. I know there might be some controversy about some steps or something, but he lived such a long life. He was so crucial and essential in so many discussions, so many decisions when he was at, and he was always the reference for many politicians or diplomats or something like that. So I think you cannot question his legacy and importance of his path, his path for not only for this country, for the U.S., but or Europe, but for the whole world as well.
The ambassador studied at Vilnius University and also at Oxford University, St. John's College, and she studied philosophy, interestingly enough. And I saw a quote that I wanted to read to you, which actually pertains to Lithuania. And it says, "It's hard to win a war with the front at your back, with the front at your back." And that's potentially a situation in the Ukraine that has Russia on both sides. Does that fact make you and your countrymen more or less sensitive to what's going on in the Ukraine?
What's happening in Ukraine for us is really existential and crucial, and it's not only for governments or military, but I think for every person in our society. We do follow from the very beginning, and I would like to say not only beginning in the February 24th, 2021, but the war in Ukraine started in 2014. You shouldn't forget that, when Russia annexed Crimea and started on Luhansk, buying them, it never ceased. The wars in maybe much smaller scale shootings were happening almost daily, or before the war was in Georgia in 2008. So Lithuanians do remember that and know that it's not only one war, but that's a systematic attitude by Russians to not only increase and strengthen, enhance their political influence, their military presence in the region, or economic tools, but also even with military, with soldiers' boots on the ground, trying by, I would say, 19th century or beginning of the 20th century means and methods, brutal military force to annex other countries or to increase their own territory. So we are very cautious about that. We know that very much, and that's why we follow very, very closely what's happening in Ukraine, how Ukraine is fighting, how facing this new war, and that's why our also the full support to Ukraine goes, not only from the government, military, but from the population as well. And later say a couple of words, I mean, how the small country fundraised millions of euros or dollars to buy some equipment or taking refugees one. But going back to your quotation, so yes, if you want to win, we have to face the reality, enemy, and to see how we can contribute, and how we can better fight.
If we follow the narrative of this war, at the beginning it was, could the Ukrainians resist? Would Putin use nuclear weapons? Would the Allies stay together? What word today would you use to describe the situation in Ukraine, the state of affairs on the battlefield?
I think Ukraine did very well since February 24. If we remember the first nights of February, already almost 2 years ago, when everybody was saying that Zelensky or something had to flee and find some refugee in neighboring countries, at least in Western Ukraine, and many were not so optimistic about the possibility for Ukrainians to resist Russian occupation, and how much they actually went to Ukraine. They went next to Kiev. So we were not so pessimistic. Lithuania was the first ones, even before the war started, to give the first military assistance, and we were working with Ukrainian military as well, training them, and so we knew how can they fight and what spirit they have of fighters before. So they proved that for the decades already. So we were more. So I think Ukrainians did a lot. They did a lot to take over to take back the territories which were occupied during the first weeks and months of that. So they showed how to do wars, how to fight. President Zelensky and the whole team, the whole government showed also where the leadership is. They pulled back not only the whole country, but also the national community, who stood very firmly for Ukraine and together with Ukraine, or against Russia introducing sanctions, helping Ukraine's military, financial things, taking care of the people, refugees, but also taking sanctions against Russia, that they would not be able to continue this their production as well. So this year, of course, probably everybody was expecting the miracle as well, that they would take over the rest of the territory or something like that with that. But we have to be also realistic. Russians also know how to fight, how to wage wars. They had months and months to prepare to their defense. They put mines, field mines. They built their front lines. They had that luxury. They had that luxury because we didn't manage to supply Ukrainians quickly with the right weapons. it reaches that. We cannot complain because that's, I mean, it's amazing how the international community is, and especially led by this country, United States, helps the Ukrainians in Ukraine to fight. But it's also, we have to acknowledge that sometimes the weaponry and it was not quick enough and not in full depth. So if they had had ATACMS or HIMARS a year or a year and a half ago, so we could have faced others. So we cannot expect, because everybody was looking for the counteroffensive this year now, saying that they didn't do very well, so we have to negotiate. So no, we have to remain optimistic about Ukrainians' possibility to retake the territory, and we have to do everything possible to ensure that Ukraine wins and Russia loses. Because then we have to stop, then by this we would stop this chain of new wars or new invasion, what I mentioned. 2008 Georgia, 2014 Crimea, and now 2021 again the full-scale land invasion. So I think.
In hearing you speak, I'm reminded a little bit about the interview we had with the Polish ambassador here to Washington, who, in talking about the war, seemed to give a hint, which you also just did now, that somehow you feel the war differently. Poland, of course, you know, on the edge of on the front lines there, also a nation with two borders or two frontiers. Do you feel that somehow the Europe of the East, next to Russia, versus Europe of the West, which is also next to the Atlantic, understand the urgency and feel it more deeply?
Yes and no. I think that's the coin which has both sides. As I mentioned, I think we were very positive, but I wouldn't say surprised, but we were very, very happy on how Europe and the whole world, Western world, reacted to this Russian invasion. I think that was a big surprise for Russia and for other authoritarian countries, how the Western countries, from the very beginning, not even the very beginning, but before the war, especially the President Biden's attitude and speaking loud about the evil intentions by the Russia, how they forged the global alliance to help Ukraine and to give the weapons and advice and all the other help to them. So it did all the countries from the West Europe, East Europe, or Central European, I mean EU, the US, Australia, Japan, South Korea. There was really global alliance for that. So that is, and it still exists. So we are working together on that as well, just in Rammstein meetings and meeting and seeing and talking with Ukrainians how best we can help. Then another thing, potential, and how much weaponry. We found that the Western countries was not, or the NATO or some other, the big alliance was not so much prepared for such full-scale war, and we were not, our stocks were depleted quite fast or something like that, and we have to boost our defense industry, so we're talking on that as well. But to your other question, if really our frontline countries do see situation different than the Western wing of the European Union or NATO, probably yes. But that's very natural because of our geography and our history. We talked before this meeting as well. My generation still remembers how it is to live in the Soviet Union or under the occupation, when the war is lost or was not, and that's when you can, that's full oppression, you cannot travel, you cannot talk what you want, that's something like that. And seeing now what the Russians did in Bucha, in Green, all these war crimes, so we do remember from our grandparents, there was the same methods used, or the kids taken to the Russian and to be brainwashed and adopted by Russian families as well. Our Lithuanian or the Baltics families, starting from the elderly to the babies, they were moved to Siberia by the cattle train cars or something, and they said many died there or something like that. So it's still this memory, it's very vivid in our society and in consciousness. So we do emotionally and everything. Really understand what Ukrainians are going through now. We are open our houses and homes to Ukrainian refugees, so we also hear from the talks what the families face before or now what they're facing there. as well, and we shouldn't forget that we have borders with Russia. So, and you never know if they, how to say, with the invasions, they're moving west. If they're not stopped now, who knows, who can guarantee that they will not try to test the Article 5 of NATO. So that's why we are very cautious about that, and we say that it's better to stop them now than to rely on just fate and everything that they would not.
So you're saying essentially that the fate of your country is the fate of Ukraine, and Ukraine is the fate of your country. And with that in mind, and with the objective that I'm sure Mr. Zelensky, the message he tells to all his top diplomats is to keep the support there. What do you think of the effort right now, or the reality, where aid is being twinned with the situation in Israel and Ukraine? You might say these days that Israel is more a high-octane issue. Does that bother you? What do you make of that twinning of an aid package?
First of all, I would say just maybe correct what's happening in Ukraine is not only tested, it's test for our future, like Lithuanians or frontline countries, but I think Russia also threatens the whole European security architecture. It's much wider. So that would have implications not only for us, something like that, but for the whole or transatlantic security order which we had since the end of the Cold War. And we thought that we would be living in the peace for centuries now, and we have a good arrangements and everything, it works. So that is a test for everyone, and we have to understand as well, and not only the European capitals like Paris or Berlin or something we see as well, and you see that's why we're working together so much. What happened in Gaza or Hamas attacking Israel, that's appalling terrorist attacks as well, but I mean, it's even very hard to speak about whether civilians, kids and women, men, older, we had to live with, and what atrocities were made. It's very good to see now the hostages going home or something, the process is there. But I would say it's the same side of the coin. We see that bad guys, somehow it's a feeling that the bad guys are united. We saw even Hamas going to Moscow, I think this March, this year in March, and now they're also supporting as well. Iranians supplying their drones to Russia to attack Ukraine. They are supporting Hamas to proceed with the terrorist attacks as well. So that's a thing. So we're not so much preoccupied about the intentions of on the contrary, I think what happened in Israel, that's also the sign that we have to be together. We have to sit together and united and really to see how best we can tackle is in this new changing world. When the bad guys, as they say, they're united, they are working together, supporting each other, and really question if we do enough for ourselves. And I mean for ourselves, that's for Ukraine and for others. If one example, North Korean, I think they gave more ammunition to Russia, 155, than the Europeans gave to Ukraine or something like that. So we have to reinforce and to enhance.
So it doesn't, you're not bothered that the aid packages twin together. So long as it delivers the fruits to the war effort, you're easy
it's
either way.
Packages, yes. I think it's the most important thing. It should be passed as well. So
the Russians have been well known to intrude also in the Baltics, in disinformation campaigns, in Estonia with people, I think, certain immigrants being forced into Estonia from Russia. Tell us a little about that kind of infiltration in the life of the country.
There are many. Now we're living in the hybrid warfare as well. If we see in Ukraine and in Israel in that the real wars and fighting, the hybrid attacks been taking already for decades as well. cyber attacks, experiencing, I think everybody speaks about cyber attack against Estonia now, I don't know, 15, when was the first one, which was eye-opening for many, but we are facing that almost daily. Of course, that helped us to take the countermeasures to prevent that and to be safe. So we are spreading our knowledge and experience of how to counter that. You mentioned misinformation, disinformation. That's also very daily. It's done very wisely and very good. That is very even difficult to detect when it's misunderstood. Where is disinformation and where is real information? Because the information starts to spread by real information, and then step by step it's infiltrated by some new disinformation which changes perception of the people, but very slowly, so it's very difficult to detect, because if it's disinformation is put immediately in the hole, so it's more easy. And it's not only against Lithuania or the Baltics or the region, but it also the target is NATO and the EU as such, or even the US. So we have to be, then you're not, you have in the front line everywhere, wherever you are, whether you're in DC, whether you're Paris, whether you're Montana or California or Italy or Spain or Lithuania or Estonia. So there's no one. So you have to work very together how to tackle disinformation and misinformation. We do that in Lithuania, for instance. There is very not grassroots initiative as well, like elks versus trolls, because that's how, if somebody detects that there are some disinformation attack to different channels, so the people go to the computers, go to that and sending counter information, explaining why it's not true and why you should not believe or something like that. So it's one of that. Sometimes I think we are working on that. We have to be more, how to say, clear about preventing Russian television access, because if it's only messages from propaganda, so it's not already freedom of expression, but it's a tool, instrument to infiltrate some different information, and we have to counter that, and we did that stopping those channels. I know the US probably has a bit different philosophy. European is that we have to then. And on migrants, we were the first ones to experience, now 2 years ago, when we supported...
From where are the migrants?
From Belarus, when we're supporting the democratic Belarusian opposition after the elections, which were like forged in the end, and say that the people were taken to the prisons as well. So in Lithuania, one of the supporters, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who is the elected president or leader of Belarus, she found refuge in Lithuania. So then Lukashenko regime started to sending migrants from Asia, from different countries to Lithuania illegally, hundreds and thousands daily, to say it openly saying that that's that's a tool, how he would force us to change our position.
So they go to the border,
They go to the border, they cross the border, and then they find or asylum or something. Of course, they maybe they want to go further to Europe or something like that. So we did with the help of the whole EU and also US, stop these flows, for instance, from Iraq to Belarus, and then there were charter planes going that, so that would stop this, and we built the wall, not wall, the front or something like that, and something adopted some...
So you were talking about disinformation again, continuing. Do you expect Putin to engage in the same disinformation in our elections, in the United States elections next year? What's your thought on that?
I can only speculate as well. I don't have it, most probably as well, at least. But we have to, I would say I think it's not for me to tell you us, but we have to be very vigilant, all of us, who is mingling to our elections and how and what it means as well, and to do lessons learned and to share the experience among.
And speaking about elections, with a likely rematch with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, If Trump were to be elected, how does that affect the European equation?
We will see, we will have to work, I think, anyways. It's how the ancient Greece said, pantareia, so it's everything in flow. So we can, every situation we will have to see how to work with us. Lithuania's ambassador here, I'm more than open to work with
You must be aware, certainly, that there's a growing, I would call it, coolness to aid to the Ukraine in certain parts of the United States. It's been reported about and so forth, and it seems like it's gathering some momentum here. If the United States pulls back, whether behind the presidency of Trump or another candidate, how would Europe react? Would they pick up the slack, or would it deepen their own doubts about the war effort? I have to interview myself here.
So maybe it's a sign that we have to finish already our interview and not to interfere with your nice lunch and talks as well. Now, I don't know how much is known, but now Europe is paying even more, giving bigger aid to Ukraine than the United States. So the United States was really crucial because the weapons and what the United States is that. So, but I still am big believer in the United States and transatlantic cooperation that our history showed as well when the US leads, so it's everything falls very well and good. So I know it's always might be some difficulties in temporary, but I do believe as many contacts that we have on the Hill, we're talking with our administration as well, think tanks as well. Every majority sharing quite optimistic views anyways that US assistance will continue. It might be some or different or something like that, but I think it's
So maybe they're trying to tell us to stop, but we'll continue a little bit longer. When you go around Capitol Hill or maybe travel around the country and make the case for the war, and you pick up a bit of resistance, maybe in a congressional office, in a Senate hearing, do you understand why they may be backing off? How do you deal with the arguments that they put forward that America has to look after itself a little more? You must have heard that, I imagine, going around. How do you answer that question?
To be very frank, when I engage, so I mostly see the positive attitudes and understanding, especially after some discussions as well. As we spoke before during this an hour or more, today the world is really global. It doesn't matter where are you, what kind of borders you have, but we are so much interdependent, interrelated, intertwined, something like that. So I don't imagine how one country can close its borders and to be self-sufficient, even the biggest countries as well. So you always have to rely on partners or some. So that's I think, and that's also the message is here. But even this, what we have to understand, the U.S. has to, the support goes to Ukraine from the United States. The money which was signed by Congress and Senate, most of that money is dedicated, is put for buying and acquisition of American weapons, which are sent to Ukraine. So it's nothing that. So it's even creating cynical would be, but even it's creating jobs here in the United States as well, and creating new working places and giving something like that. So it's you shouldn't forget that as well.
I imagine you've met with Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky. No, not yet. How would you describe how he's changed since the beginning of the war, from people that meet with him and what he's gone through and what his nation's gone through?
I don't know if he changed as well, but I think since the very beginning of the war, he showed what the real leadership is. He was, I think nobody would forget his first message the first morning after that, saying, "Good morning, we are here." we are here in Kiev and walking through the Kiev and saying that we are alive and we are ready to fight and we will fight as well. And I think the spirit remains. Of course, very human. He's a human. He is not from the iron. So to have on top every day and every night, almost 2 years, dealing with the war, fighting with the war, seeing that and together the whole country, but also looking for some alliances and partnership across the world. Not only among the like-minded countries, but also to the African countries, Latin Americans, or something like that. So
it's almost unimaginable the number of difficulties that confront your president. But even in Europe, there's some I would say, storm clouds as in terms of the Ukrainian effort. You have in Europe now the ascendancy of right-wing governments. Obviously, we know in Hungary and in Italy, tilted to the right. In the Netherlands, also tilted to the right. In Romania, there's a party called the Gold Party, which I think is about 22%. What do you make of all this tilt to the right, and how far do you think it could go?
It's again predictions. I do remember when there were elections in Italy and everybody was preoccupied how that would be, but now Italians one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine. So I think we haven't project. I said we can, how it's the saying, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but when the situation occurs, to see how we can do that, whether really to reassess that situation, not to rely on our prejudging how it could be or something, what it should be, but to see what is the situation on the ground when it occurs and how we can do that. So.
One of our guests was a former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Mike McFarland. He made an interesting comment. He said he was surprised that the support of Putin was so deep in Russia. And he was surprised in a way. He said, it seemed like I didn't really know the Russian people as they turned out to be. If this war comes to some conclusion, how long do you think it would take the Ukrainians or those people from the Baltics to forgive, forget, and turn the other way, or do you think that's not realistic?
It's also very difficult to say. It very much depends how the war ends. What would be when it ends, and conditions or something like that, and what kind of Russia would be then.
Yeah, well,
So it's as well, but.
Well, no one's making any predictions. Anyways, we decided beforehand that we wouldn't eat before we talk. So I thank you for your comments. And if there are any questions in particular, we'll take them. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question about the likely end game here that you envision. My name is Alan Raska. I'm Romania's honorary consul general in Ohio. My daytime is I run a law firm. My day job is I run a law firm. So I deal with different types of conflicts and conflict resolution. But the typical resolution of a conflict that I see is when both parties are equally unhappy with the result, but they can live with the result. And with that in mind, do you see a lasting peace where Ukraine is happy with the result and Russia is unhappy with the result? And if so, what would be the contours of that scenario, that deal?
So put it again, so I'll repeat your question. In essence, what are you asking?
Is there a deal that Ukraine would be happy with, Russia unhappy with, that could be long-lasting?
Is there a deal that
envision?
Ukraine could be happy with and Russia would be unhappy with? Sense of
You were citing quite a time Michael McFaul about what he said about Russia or that. In this sense, I would like to cite another very much Ukrainian friend, Professor Snyder, who said that that is Russian imperialistic. Russia is still in the imperialistic mindset, something like that, and sometimes it has to lose, that it would not pursue further wars or something like that. So, big question, what does it mean to lose? Something that I think that would be shown, but we have to have that in mind as well, because I wouldn't be afraid to get out of that that's true. All the negotiations are long-lasting. Both sides are equally unhappy or equally happy or something like that. And sometimes I think some sides has to lose. That it would not encourage them to continue this divorce because they haven't lost in Georgia. That's why we have 2014 in Crimea, and they were winners from 2014, so then we have 2021 or something like that. So we just, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that, I mean, Russia loses or something like that. They know how to make
Russia has to lose. Other questions? Jim?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pick up on your discussion of Georgia 2008 and Ukraine 2014. You all in Central Eastern Europe follow Russia and understand Russia better than those of us in the United States, for sure. Understandably so. One of the things that surprised me, it didn't shock me that Putin invaded Ukraine at some point, that he invaded it in 2014. But it's not clear to me why he did it when he did it. And I'm just curious if you and your colleague analysts in Lithuania have some insight in that. Why didn't he invade in 2016 or 2018 or 2020 or 2021, or why didn't he wait till 2024? Any thought about why he did it when he did it?
Why, for those in the back, Jim asks, why did Putin invade at the time he did? What's the sense or the logic behind the timing of that?
That's a good question. I think we will have books and books written about that, and I would love to read them as well. And I think the problem is probably very few people know what's really happening in Moscow and around the Putin. He's very much protected, and even with the COVID, with pandemic, he was even more protective, at least what we're hearing. So that is he has very close inner circle as well. So it's very difficult. Some they saying that they were maybe thinking to invade earlier, but the COVID pandemic somehow stopped or something like that. Nobody knows, I mean, it's some mindset of authoritarian, autocratic leaders, what they do, and we were very afraid, I mean, not afraid, but I mean vigilant. The year before or half year before, when the Russians had big exercises around Ukraine, and we thought this is also almost preparing to invade or something like that. Some others were calling, no, that's not the time, this time. Everyone knew there's beginning, so, but I think it's also very important that it's amazing the intelligence working in that, because from the US side, we know we knew months before already warning signs that about Putin's intentions to invade Ukraine. The biggest problem, I think, not so many believe that, or something, even Ukrainians themselves sometimes, they think they were preparing, but they were scared that it doesn't happen, so that would be.
Other questions? Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your speech. My name is Dana Belgiman. I'm the Honorary Consul General of Romania in San Francisco. And I have a question. Lithuania has a border with Kaliningrad. On the other side, there is Belarus, and there's a very narrow corridor, very small corridor between Belarus and Kaliningrad. How much concern is that strategically to Lithuania, and what is it Lithuania does in order to prevent something happening?
So the question was, there's a very small corridor between Kaliningrad, the Russian-occupied land to the east of Lithuania, and Belarus. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's, I mean, very good question, and I'd be very much preoccupied and be very much aware of our situation, geographic situation, and what is that. Kaliningrad region, so Lithuania has a border, for those who maybe don't know, with Russia on the west side, with the Kaliningrad region, which is claimed to that, and is one of the most militarized regions in Europe, if not the world. And Belarus on the eastern side, but now this last invasion of Russia to Ukraine demonstrated that Belarus, at least militarily terms, is part of Russia, because they could easily send their troops, biggest amounts of troops to Ukraine to wage wars from Belarusian territory. So we regard our border with Belarus as NATO-Russia border, actually, something like that. And it's really this Suwalki gap, as we call this corridor what you mentioned between Kaliningrad region and Belarus is one of the probably, if not the most vulnerable NATO point in that. So we're working with our allies as well to ensure deterrence for that. We are very much grateful for the President Biden saying that every inch of NATO territory will be defended. And we worked with our NATO partners now in Madrid last year, this year in Vilnius, hosting summit, and the number of important decisions we're taking on the strengthening NATO eastern flank, or some say in frontlines countries, including Lithuania and Romania as well in that sense, air defense, and to have strong regional plans. So we're working with all our also NATO partners to do that. For us, it's very important to have. We had Germany-led NATO troops brigade. Now we are working with with Germany that they would be instead of brigade to have battalion. Sorry, we had battalion now to have brigade. So we are providing infrastructure, working to have the exercises. We're working with the US also side to keep the battalion placed in Lithuania now for a number of years. It's on the rotational basis, but we have almost permanently American troops on our ground. So we think that would be the best deterrence as well. And we have to keep strengthening our military presence on the eastern borders wherever it is, because what we see, Russians don't give up. They're not focusing only on Ukraine. They are seeing Western and NATO and EU as the big enemies. And a year ago, in December last year, they adopted a new military concept where they outlined what the reforms they would make, military reforms. They created two armies. If it was one against Western, so now there would be in the Northern Army and Central, St. Petersburg, Moscow would be against like Western, and for instance in Kaliningrad, they were so small, they would have two new divisions even created. So that is, and we as we say talking about some battalions or brigades, so it's just, of course, maybe definitely quality of the troops is different, and that's it, because it's not only the troops on the ground, but the whole alliance is standing for us. But we have to realize on what kind of terms they are thinking. For them now they have on their economy, war economy. It's based already on the military production, on the military interests as well, and they increase their troops, their soldiers are dying thousands. But there's a vast country which doesn't care about the losses, even human losses or something. They've been replaced very quickly. So, and for us that would be different. So that we have to be very together, and I'm very also grateful to be invited here in more Romanian somehow event and party, something like that. We're very close allies and friends in NATO, and this will be 9 or something, or border countries. That's so we have to carry this NATO flag together, and to make sure that NATO Eastern Flank countries fully ready and fully supplied, and have the sufficient support from the rest of NATO member states.
Ms. Ambassador, thank you very much for those remarks and coming and joining us here. And I think you'll be here for a few more minutes anyways, so if there's anyone who wishes to ask a question, we'll take one more question. Yes.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us here. I'd like to hear your thoughts, opinion, speculation, facts that you have regarding the position of China, President Xi, in this whole context right now. Now, we're expanding a little bit to what's happening in Israel, in the Gaza Strip, and what's happening in Russia, in Ukraine. Do you think there may be any intention, possibility that she will accelerate his intended invasion of Taiwan? general thoughts and maybe specific.
Okay, a question is the introduction of China in this equation. What sort of impact, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if China decides somehow or invade or at least block Taiwan or something, we're hearing, it's my personal speculation, I'm more relying on think tanks or something like that, so I don't like talking. So, but that would be clear, that would be the crisis, global crisis and global impact for everyone because that of supply chains or something like that. So that would be very, very, very bad. So that's I'm seeing, especially in this country. That's why there are so many talking about that and preparing for this as well. So I think it's very important, and that's why I also underlined so many times that we have to be very much together and to prepare for the worst or something as well. Talking not only about military boosting our defense industries, cooperating to protect ourselves, but also to ensuring our independence of supply chains and crucial infrastructure, crucial industries and everything, because we never know what would be tomorrow as well. So, but we know who are our friends and that how much we can have to cooperate together.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us today. And then we return the schedule to the team here for the afternoon session.